Greetings! I am Herbert Erpaderp, and today I'm building this bolt-action Churchill tank. This is a 28mm or 1/56 scale plastic kit, and the plastic is produced in conjunction with Warlord by AVRE. I'm not sure if an AVRE branded version of this tank is available yet, but I'm sure there will be at some point. You can see in the upper right corner of the box, there's a list of all the variants of the Churchill tank this kit can be used to make. There's a Mark III, Mark IV, Mark V CS or close support, Mark VI with both the welded and cast turret, AVRE or NA75. That's 7 variants of the Churchill tank. The back of the box looks like this. It's pretty good. There's a bit of historical information on the Churchill and its role in the war. There's an image of the included, detailed British tank commander who looks very tank commanderly. Something I quite like is that there is a number of some very nicely painted Churchills built from this kit. In fact, there's an image of each turret you can build. The turrets are the main difference between each variant. Of these, I have decided I want to build the Mark VI with the cast turret. The box also shows us an image of the included decal sheet. So, what comes in the box? Is it cookies? No, you shouldn't eat any of what's in here. First, we get this instruction sheet. For the most part, it's pretty clearly laid out and easily understood. Hull instructions are on the front page, and the many turret instructions are obviously on the other side. One issue I had though, is the instructions for cutting slots into the turret are on the front page and can easily be missed or forgotten when you've got to the turret building stage. Not a huge issue though. Here's the decal sheet. It looks pretty good. There's a nice variety of markings, including some for a Soviet Churchill, which is nice. There are 3 plastic-wrapped sprues in this box, the first of which holds the upper hull, both turrets, some guns, and various other bits and pieces. The hull top is probably the best I've seen from Warlord and AVRE so far. The tools on the engine deck are very crisp. In fact, all of the details on this model are quite sharp. That's not to say the previous ones were terrible at all. I think it shows continuing improvement. You can see especially on the side of the cast turret that while the details are good and sharp, there are still some mold lines. Fortunately, not all of them are this prominent, but as with all plastic kits, some cleanup is going to be required. There's not a lot on the second sprue. Obviously the main items here are the hull side and suspension gear parts, and again the detailing is really quite nice. There are a lot of wheels here, and I was curious as to how they would approach this, having been a little disappointed with the road wheels on previous AVRE kits, but these look pretty good. There are of course some other bits, like the upper hull front and these radiator box things. And of course we have the tank commander. He looks pretty well detailed. The bits of excess plastic on his ears look like big floppy dog ears, which amuses me because I'm an adult. Other than those, the commander looks neat and shouldn't need too much cleanup. The final sprue has more detail parts, the lower hull and most obviously the tracks. These come in 4 sections, and they're really nicely detailed. At this point, I'm not surprised that these plastics by Warlord and AVRE have really nice looking tracks. Hopefully they go together well. Poor fitting is the main thing that can let these tracks down. The bottom of the hull is pretty nice looking. There's a lot of rivet detail. It's a bit of a shame that it won't really be visible. All of the bits on these sprues are very nice looking, error-free, and most importantly, no parts were missing. The first step to building this Churchill is taking all of these parts to make the track sets. First thing to do if you want to build a Mark III or Mark IV variant is to drill out the couple of holes at the front of the inner track part. Refer to the instructions if you need to see what I mean. I'm building a Churchill Mark VI, so I don't need to do that. The 2 halves of the hull side go together quite easily, and I like the way they have designed this. Next, the tracks need to be added. Make sure to apply the glue to the outside wheel parts rather than the inner part. The track parts don't come into contact with the central bar part, only the wheels. I then attach the tracks, starting with the bottom part. I think this is the most important part to get into place neatly, so I do it first. It fits into place very easily. There's not much room for the part to shift side to side, and unless you put the track part on backwards, it's hard to get this wrong. I then glue on the front and rear track end parts. These also go on pretty easily. If you're going to attach the front mudguard parts, then there's not really much point in adding the upper section of the tracks. I'm leaving them off, so I then add the aforementioned part. The forward section of this track part is curved downwards slightly, so it neatly joins the other parts. It is not at all hard to get this into place. The end result is good. but I do think the tracks seem to sit a little far away from the drive sprocket. Not a huge issue, and it looks fine unless you're looking really closely. Next, the track sets can be glued to the lower hull part. This is just as easy as with other Italeri tanks. This is slightly different though, in that there is a couple of tabs at the front of the hull that fit into corresponding holes in the side part. This obviously helps get the parts lined up nice and neatly. The result is pretty good, though the end of the tracks on the rear aren't quite perfectly straight. They shouldn't be too visible, so it's not much of a problem. I then glue the upper hull to the lower. There are guide pins at the front and rear, and the parts go together easily, though you might find you have to apply pressure to the front of the hull to eliminate the gap there. It is good to try and completely eliminate gaps during the gluing process to avoid having to fill them later, but in this case it's not super important because this lower front plate covers the gap. It goes into place easily. The two nubs should be towards the top. It looks pretty good if you ask me. The rear of the hull can then be glued into place. No hassles here. Looks pretty good. Next, I take the machine gun part for the hull and glue it into this here upper frontal plate. There's a rectangle on the back to guide its positioning and it fits very well. Make sure you put this in the right way up. The shorter protrusion next to the gun should be on the left side. That is the left from the tanker's perspective. I then glue that hull front into the appropriate location on the tank. This went in really easily. It more or less just dropped right into place. Next, I install the vision devices for the driver and hull gunner. I install these after the front plate because there's a tiny overhang that might interfere with that part. I believe these periscopes rotated, but I've decided to attach mine facing forward. Then come the headlamps, and they're located right up against the track part, so tweezers are highly recommended for this. It's not too hard to nudge them gently until they look to be neatly in place and facing forward. Moving on to the side of the hull, I attach these boxes. I'm assuming these boxes contain the radiator equipment. They are easily guided into place by the pins on the back of the part. Some versions of the Churchill have a cover over this part, which I guess might be to deflect air away from the vehicle or maybe to stop debris from falling in through the mesh. The parts go into place very easily and I'm quite happy with how it looks. While I'm here, I also attached the spare track link to the side of the hull here. This is a nicely detailed part, and I wish there were a few more spare track links to place around the tank. Next comes the exhaust system. This isn't hard to install. I'm pretty glad this is a separate piece. It looks much more detailed than it would if it were just molded into the hull. To complete the hull, I attach these, what I think might either be cases of machine gun ammo or cans of fuel. These easily go into place on the rear mudguards. Of course, if you want a more complete hull, you could install the front mudguards, which seems like it would be pretty easy. I chose to leave them off because I think it looks more interesting that way. I assume the main reason these would be removed is mud or snow clogging them up. Onto the turret. The main turret I want to build for this Churchill is the Mark VI cast turret. I start with the stowage box that goes on the rear of the turret. For most variants of the tank, we need to cut these slots out. Be sure to test fit as you go. These slots will function as mounting points for these, what I imagine are fire extinguishers. Simply slot these into place and add some glue. This wasn't especially hard, though it did take a bit of time with all the test fitting. But it's better to be careful now than have to come back later and fill in mistakes. I then attached the lid. This is simple, and the part has raised guides on the bottom to help with positioning. Looks just like a Churchill stowage box. The instructions say to add the details to the upper half of the turret first, but I'm going to start by adding the gun mantlet to the lower turret part. The machine gun should be on the left side of the main gun from the tanker's perspective. I then glue both halves of the turret together. I had to apply a bit of pressure to minimize the gap here, otherwise there was no issue. Because I've glued the base of the gun in place, I make sure its elevation is satisfactory before the glue sets. I figured gluing the turret halves together now would remove the risk that I might damage the antennas and stuff on top of the turret during this process. Next, I glued the hatches in. Probably used a bit too much glue here, but it could be worse. The instructions will tell you which hatch parts to use for which turret. They are all different enough that I don't think they would properly fit into the wrong holes anyway. They can of course be modelled open, or even with the commander standing up out of either hatch. I've obviously chosen not to do that. Next comes the antennas. Not really a whole lot to adding these. The taller one with the bit at the bottom goes in the right rear corner here. The other shorter antenna goes here, closer to the center behind both hatches. Next, this tiny searchlight goes here in the hole next to the commander's hatch. I'm not sure if this light was able to rotate and move around, but I suspect it would be. I've installed it facing straight ahead anyway. When it came time to attach this thing that goes on the left side of the turret, I realized I had made a mistake. I forgot to make a mounting hole for it in the side of the turret before I glued it together. I'm getting pretty good at making this kind of mistake. I probably wouldn't have done so if the instructions saying this hole needed to be made were in the same place as the rest of the turret instructions. Could be worse. I simply trimmed down the mounting pin on whatever this part is and glued it on. I had to eyeball its position because without that hole there was nothing to guide it. It looks okay to me. Next comes the main gun. This part has the end of the barrel already drilled out, which is always nice. The end that joins the rest of the tank is keyed to ensure correct positioning. This gun doesn't have a whole lot in the way of mold lines and is very easily cleaned up. I glued it into place without encountering any major issues. I used my knife to gently manipulate the gun into place and try to minimize any gaps there. There is still a visible gap there, but it's not too bad, and is hard to see at an angle at which you would be likely to view this model on the gaming table anyway. It would be pretty easy to fix with putty though. I used blue tack to temporarily attach the stowage box to the rear of the turret. Looks very much like a Churchill cast turret should. There is a reason I'm only temporarily attaching this part. We can almost make 2 full turrets from this box. The main reason we can't is because there are only enough parts to make one of the stowage box that goes on the rear of the turret. There's only one set of antennas, and there's only one of the tube thing that goes on the left side of the turret. I'm happy to omit the antennas and tube thing, but the stowage box is kind of important, at least in my opinion. This kind of annoys me. I mean, I'm not going to go and yell about it or something, but they've gone to the effort of making this kit with so many options, and quite obviously people are going to want to make both turrets, because that's a nice, easy way to be able to field different variants of the tank and have them be visibly different. They could have included duplicates of the couple of parts needed to make 2 full turrets. I'm obviously not an expert on making plastic model sprues, but I don't imagine it would have been that hard to incorporate. The paranoid part of me wants to say it was some business-minded person deciding it would be a good way to get people to buy more of the same kit. Probably not the case at all. It's more likely to just be an oversight, something nobody thought of. It's a bit disappointing though. At a later date, I'm going to make a casting of this assembled stowage box and glue that to the rear of the welded turret. That's why I have not yet glued it to the cast turret. I'm not doing it now because I don't have any silicone to make a mold with. Maybe I will do that as a Erpaderp's quick tips video. Anyway, I am also going to build as much of the welded turret as I can. So I begin doing that by gluing both turret sides to the core part of the turret. These fit nicely and are guided by the raised bars and slots that you can see. The turret rear part can then be slid in here like so. You can see the guides for the stowage box, and the round raised part should be towards the bottom. Next, I glue the gun mantlet part into the floor of the turret. At this point, I try to make sure the elevation is at least close to how I want it, though if you work quick enough, this could easily be adjusted later. I then joined the upper and lower halves of the turret together. This is pretty easy. The turret sides form a guide to ensure the floor is positioned correctly. You might have to apply a bit of pressure to get the floor in, but that's not really a huge issue. Gluing on the turret front is a sensible thing to do next. This is also easy to attach. Just make sure you put it on the correct way up, with the angled corner of the opening on the same side as the machine gun. Next come these vision devices. I'm not sure if these were able to be rotated, but I've glued them on facing forwards anyway. Next, I installed the hatches. This was every part as easy as the hatches on the cast turret. Finally, I installed the gun, which also goes into place just as easily as the other gun. This part also has the end of the barrel bored out already. There it is. Sure, it lacks a couple of parts, but it looks reasonably like a Churchill welded turret. So that's one plastic Churchill tank in 28mm scale by Warlord Games for bolt action completed. I had been wanting a Churchill in this scale for a while, and I'm pretty glad I kept putting off buying the resin version until this was released. I think this is the best of the plastic kits manufactured by AVRE so far, and I look forward to future releases because they do seem to be improving as they go. I really like how this model has turned out. I'm not an expert of course, but it looks to me like a very good representation of a Churchill tank. It measures 129mm long, 53mm wide along most of the hull, though the radiator things increase that to 63mm. The hull is 29mm high, and 44mm to the top of the cast turret, or 42mm with the welded turret, not including the antennas. I don't have any other models of a Churchill in this scale, but here's a quick look at the tank with a bolt-action 28mm scale plastic commando miniature next to it. His name is Mortimer and he stands about 32mm tall including the base. It looks pretty reasonable to my eyes. This kit is pretty good, but of course it's not perfect. Its biggest failing in my mind is the lack of parts to completely build a second turret. I'm not sure if that's a silly complaint to have, but what modeler or gamer doesn't want to have more choices when fielding their tanks? Fortunately, the good things greatly outweigh the bad. There is a lot of choice as to which variant of the Churchill you want to build. The parts were neatly molded and error-free, and the result is a nice, well-detailed Churchill tank. This is a fairly recent release from Warlord. I am not aware of the specifics of their deal with Italeri, who obviously make the plastic parts of the kit, but I would expect Italeri to have a version of this kit with their own branding available at some point, if not right now. So if you're after a plastic Churchill, maybe keep your eye out for that. It might be cheaper. So what do you think? I would love to see any comments, questions or suggestions you might have in the comments section below. If you liked this video, click the thumbs up button. If you thought it was terrible, obviously click thumbs down. If you feel so inclined, I would certainly appreciate it if you did things like sharing this video with anyone who might find it helpful or interesting. And if you've not done so already, click subscribe to be kept informed of when I upload new videos. If you really like the videos I make, and you want to see them a little earlier than everyone else, please consider helping to support the channel via Patreon at patreon.com/HerbertErpaderp. Click the Patreon logo on screen now or the link in the description. If you pledge as little as $1 a month, you can see my videos early. Anyone that pledges $10 or more per month will receive a personalized thank you card from me, Herbert Erpaderp. If not, that's okay. I hope you enjoy my videos anyway. I shall return soon, so until then, happy modelling and thanks for watching. Farewell.